Sorry about that, babe.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Bits and Glory podcast. This is going to be episode number 1. I actually did a few podcasts a couple years ago. They were pretty much, I think they were on my YouTube. They might have been on a podcast website. I don't know. It could have been like a pseudo podcast, but either way, I wasn't too thrilled with how they came out. So I ended up kind of just burying them. Long story short, though, wanted to get some different content up on the channel, so I figured let's revive the podcast. Just want to give a quick overview of that, and then we'll get into the actual podcast, which you can see. Episode 1 is going to be about Final Fantasy on the NES, which is interesting timing, considering that the Pixel Remaster for Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 came out today on Steam and I think mobile. I actually did purchase it on Steam. Obviously, as you could assume if I'm doing this podcast, I recently have played through Final Fantasy on the NES, I think I finished it last week. And I had previously played through a different version. I'll get into that in a bit as well. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't tempted. Jesus, Lily's... What the fuck? My cats, man, I tell you. Anyway, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't tempted to replay through the Pixel Remaster. That being said, let's talk about the podcast format real quick and what it's going to be going forward. So, my goal is pretty much to pick one game and just kind of dissect it in as many ways as possible. I'm not an expert on a lot of these games. I love this game. I think Final Fantasy is amazing, but I've only beaten it 2.5 times over the course of my life. I don't know it inside and out, so don't come here expecting some completely expert knowledge on this game, because you're not going to get that here. What I really want to do is help deliver my thoughts, some background information, and, facts about the game. And then I kind of want to walk through it. Not totally, but enough to the point where I feel like we're kind of really dissecting this game inside and out. And if you're a fan of the game, hopefully you found this entertaining. If you're somebody that's been on the fence about wanting to play it, perfect. And obviously the games and the consoles are going to change as we move forward. And as of now, I'm just going to be doing this solo, but I have invited other people over the, kind of behind the scenes to do podcasts with me. Stall Talk, Alpha's back, and maybe, whoever else. If we can come to a common ground, so to speak, on a game, or we could both, or maybe even more than 2 people, agree to play through a game and really, collect our thoughts on it. That being said, episode 1, Final Fantasy on the NES. So, Final Fantasy. Obviously, it's a juggernaut of a franchise that's still going today. Whether or not I think that franchise is that good anymore is a different story. I don't. I love the old games, man. And here, I guess I'll just show this. Final Fantasy, complete in box, the original NES version. As the maps, the Explorer's Handbook, battery backup still works. I use this exact copy on my current playthrough. Let me put this down here. And during my playthrough, I utilized the Nintendo Power strategy guide for Final Fantasy, which is actually Nintendo Power Volume 17. Pretty cool, pretty in-depth. I did notice at times there were some errors and issues. A couple big things, actually. The map for Castle of Ordeal actually has an incorrect pathing, and that is a maze-like area, so luckily it's short enough, it doesn't really matter, but I digress. Obviously, Final Fantasy started with this one. This is it. This game has been remade and republished on lots of platforms. This is obviously the NES version. There was the Famicom, which is the true original version of Final Fantasy. Apparently, it was also released on the MSX2 gaming computer in Japan, the Wonder Swan Color, which was a Japan handheld system. It was remade for the Sony PlayStation on the Origins collection, which, by the way, is technically like the #1 video on my channel, probably bolstered by the fact of the Pixel Remaster. Check that review out if you haven't already. I'll link it in the description and pinned comment below. It's that, Baldur's Gate, and Enhanced Edition and Diablo are like my top 3 reviews that consistently get views all the time. So YouTube apparently likes me enough to serve me for those. And I think, like I said, Pixel Remaster probably bolstered me a little bit for that one review. Either way, that was released in Japan, Europe, and North America. If we're going to be real, I haven't played the Pixel Remaster yet. It just came out today. The time that I'm recording this video, it came out today. This is going to be uploaded probably close to a month after it gets released, but before playing that, I would probably say the PlayStation version is probably the one to go if you're going to play this game or replay it. Apparently it was released on something called the I mode in Japan as well in 2004. Never heard of that. Game Boy Advance, which is the Dawn of Souls remakes, which is 1 and 2. That's actually the first version of Final Fantasy that I played is actually on the Game Boy Advance version, and it's pretty much on par with the PS1 version. I guess you could argue that maybe it's a little bit better because of it being handheld and such. I didn't finish that though back when I played that, which it looks like it was released in 2004. Probably got it in 2004 or 2005. I was in high school at the time, and I remember I played through most of it during a massive ice storm power outage in my area, and I actually got, oddly enough, to the ice cave before I kind of called it quits. Back in that time, man, I had a rough time finishing games. I had like what I dub gaming ADD, if you will. Apparently it was also released on EasyWeb in Japan, Yahoo. I guess you could play it through the web browsers or something. It was also released on the PSP, which I'm sure a lot of people I'm sure it's better technically than the Game Boy Advance version, but I have not played that one myself. I owned a PSP for like a month and then I sold it. Probably a mistake, but I was like, oh, I'll never really play this. I've never been a huge handheld guy. That could be something else for another episode though. Obviously, as I mentioned, the Pixel remasters were released on the phone, but so were remakes, iOS and Android in 2010 and 11 respectively, Windows Phone in 2012, the Nintendo 3DS in Japan in 2015, and July 28th, 2021, the day of this recording, on Microsoft Windows. So clearly they've bled this game to death and they've remade it and yada yada yada, but we are going to be focusing on the original. And this particular version was released in North America on July 12th of 1990. So, first time I played this game, this particular version, was about a month ago, was when I started, and then I went on vacation, so I had some gaps in my time frame there. And the first version of the game that I beat was the PS1 Origins Collection. Since I reviewed that already, I kind of felt like, you know what? We shouldn't really just review this again, because the games are obviously fairly similar, and I felt like it would kind of be a little bit redundant to have 2 reviews on my channel when I don't know how many reviews I have now, maybe like 70? If 2 of them are basically on the same game, you know what I mean? So what better to kick off the podcast than to dissect Final Fantasy on the NES? I am also not privileged enough to have timestamp sort of things, like chapters, probably because I don't have 1,000 subs. I'm assuming that's the threshold to get that. I've tried to do it before. Nevertheless, I will do kind of my own chapters in the description and pinned comments if you want to pop around a little bit. So that was just kind of the introduction about the podcast, a little bit of background of the game itself, and now let's kind of dive around into the game. I'm going to do my best here. I'm recording everything through OBS, kind of on the fly. I don't have a stream deck, and I'm running my footage, which is over here. And if you're listening on the podcast, you can't see this footage, but for those of you watching on the YouTubes, you know, there's a little bit of footage going on there from my Bits Plays series. It's running at, I think, 175% speed, because it's a little bit slow. The podcast obviously is not going to be that long. I'd love it to be less than an hour if possible. And I'm going to do my best to kind of give footage of where I am, of what I'm talking about, but it's not going to be perfect, and I'm not going to do it constantly, because I do have to click off on an awful lot, which I will leave this over here for now. And let's get started with the game, okay? So, when you start with the game, you basically have to build your party. You get a brief introduction with the classic, you know, the Final Fantasy theme and the blue screen, and you get to pick between 6 classes to build your party of 4. You can double up on your classes. You could actually do, I've seen people do like 4 white mages as like a challenge run, but anyways. There's the fighter, the thief, the black belt, the red mage, the white mage, and the black mage. I have all my notes and stuff all over the place. If you see my eyes roaming around, that's exactly why. I want to go as in depth as possible as I can for you guys here. So in my opinion, the best overall class to be is the fighter. The Explorer's Handbook states, a professional fighter trained in the use of all weapons, the fighter is able to wear heavy armor and is skillful with large swords. Even with this bulky equipment, quick moves are still possible. So I found throughout the course of my playthroughs, I did about 2.5 of them, Dawn of Souls halfway, PS1 Origins all the way, and NES all the way, that the fighter is... that's the best class. I don't care what anybody says. At the beginning of the game, you're pretty strong. The middle of the game, you're strong. At the end game, you're strong too. You're pretty much strong all the way out. You could use almost any kind of equipment other than, you know, obviously some stuff that's probably designated for the mages. You really can't go wrong with a fighter. You could probably beat the game with 4 fighters, honestly, especially if you do enough grinding. I mean, obviously you could beat the game with any kind of class. That's why there's challenge runs, but it wouldn't be too difficult with the fighter. The next class is the Thief. Interesting thoughts here. So, agility and dexterity are strong points of this character. The Thief is good to have when you need to avoid attack from the enemy. So, from what I understand and what I read, as it's stated in the handbook, you could avoid the attack from the enemy. I heard that having a Thief in your party raises your overall party's chances of running. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's confined to the first or second slot, because where you are in your party, some things are determined, such as, I believe, slots 3 and 4, the ones towards the bottom of the screen, they are less likely to get hit than slots 1 and 2. And I would say, unfortunately for the Thief, the majority of the time, the Thief's probably going to be in slot 2 in a lot of your parties. I know it was for mine and my playthrough on the NES. And unfortunately, the Thief is very weak. The plus side to the Thief is when you get promoted later in the game, which I think is technically like a side quest and you don't need to do it. Pretty sure you don't have to do that. I'll get to that later. You can evolve, so to speak, into a ninja, which you could use. You basically become a fighter almost. Your stats go up drastically, and now all of a sudden you could use all these weapons and all these armors. So, kind of one of those rags to riches, you know. You see something blossom in front of your eyes, the Thief is a weak piece of shit, and then you turn into a ninja and you're a beast. The next class is Black Belt, a master of martial arts, tough both mentally and physically. This warrior could fight effectively with bare hands, no weapons equipped. So my first 2 playthroughs on the Dawn of Souls and Origins, I actually did have a Black Belt. And I feel like the Black Belt is a very solid character. If you're looking for a non-mage beyond a fighter, and especially if it's your first playthrough, I would recommend the Black Belt over the Thief. I just find that there's a lot less growing pains with the Black Belt. So the next class I've never used, and that's the Red Mage. And it seems like the Red Mage is actually a favorite of a lot of people, and I understand why. The Red Magician has the ability to learn some of both black and white magic spells and is a fairly good fighter. So basically the Red Mage is a mixture of the White Mage, the Black Mage, and the fighter, but not as good as all of them, if that makes sense. Which, the best part about the Red Mage is the hardest part of the game, other than the very end and a couple spots towards the middle end, is the beginning. And the Red Mage is a very solid class to have in your party, especially for the beginning of the game. Let me actually switch some of my stuff here. Bam. Okay. Next we're going to go into the White Mage. Using white magic, this character can heal wounds and cast many defensive spells. The White Magician is not a very good fighter, but can learn powerful magic. So, the White Mage, it's funny, if you actually read the Nintendo Power Strategy Guide, which I showed you, they tell you to equip, I believe it's the strongest sword in the game, the Mirasame, right? Or is it the Masamune? Masamune? To the White Mage, and have the White Mage, like, kill the final boss. And I'm sitting there like, man, you're tripping. I don't know if I didn't level up enough, but I was not listening to that. I gave that sword to my ninja slash thief, which I named Ryu, as you can see in the footage that's playing if you're watching on YouTube. Either way, the White Mage is good, obviously. The main allure of a White Mage is clearly healing type spells. And I find that the White Mage is pretty good. Obviously not the best attacker. But learning the healing spells is good early on, especially when money's tight. And you can't afford all of your healing potions. But also, one of the better things early game about the White Mage is being able to use the harm magic, which is able to affect undead enemies, which are pretty much littered throughout the entire game, but especially in the early game. So every single time I've played, I think I did take the white mage as well. And then lastly, we have the black mage. This character is skilled with black magic, very powerful spells used to attack the enemy. I feel like you can't, like, much like the fighter, you pretty much can't have a playthrough where you don't have the black mage. The black mage simply learns too many good spells. Obviously, the fire spells, the ice spell, the lightning spells. What is the name of the one at the end? Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Clicking on the fly here. Black magic. Nuke. Melts everything with a tremendous blast. I'd say level 8 spell. Which, by the way, we'll have to get into that soon as well. Anyway, those are the starting classes that you could choose from. And, yeah, from there, pretty much your journey begins. I don't want to, like, go over every little thing, but I do want to kind of start at the beginning. So basically, you start in the town of Corneria. You eventually go talk to the king, and you find out that the king's daughter, Princess Sarah, is captured by Garland and taken to the castle, which is up to the north, which is the Temple of Chaos, the Temple of Fiends, if you will. There, you fight Garland, you save the princess, and basically, you're part of the Warriors of Light. And you all have an orb, and the orb corresponds to the 4 elements. Unfortunately, they've lost their shine, which is pretty much the gist of the whole thing. Basically, what you need to do is throughout the game, you go into a bunch of different caves or dungeons, you defeat Elemental Fiends, and you restore the shine and the glow to those orbs. After defeating Garland and getting Princess Sarah and bringing him back to the castle, the king then builds you a bridge, which pretty much just allows you to really go forth in your quest. Pretty much everything up until that point is sort of like a prologue, creating your team, grinding a little bit, going into the castle, going into the Temple of Fiends, and doing your first boss fight. You get like the patented, you know, your journey begins sort of screen. And as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, you saw me just go into the Temple of Fiends here. But anyways, after that, your journey pretty much begins. I'm gonna close that out. And from there, there's a couple. So here's the one thing that I want to express about this game, is it's not, compared to something like Dragon Warrior 2, it's really not that open worldy. In a sense, like it kind of is at times. You can go to certain places sort of out of order, but at the end of the day, the game pretty much does guide you on a certain path all the way through. So, in saying that, it's like the king builds the bridge and it really opens you up, but you are kind of on a defined path. So even though things have opened up, it doesn't really, it pretty much just is kind of connecting you to the next spot of the game. The princess gives you a lute, which it's kind of like a mysterious weapon in the beginning of the game. You don't really necessarily know what it's all about, but trust me, it comes in handy later in the game. So after rescuing the princess and getting the bridge built, pretty much the next part of the game is working up towards waking up the elf prince. Now there's a bunch of things that kind of go into this, which I'm going to discuss here. So one of the earlier, and this is where the footage is going to kind of get all fucked up, but I'll try my best to play some relevant footage here. I guess we probably have to do this first, but alright. So one of the first places that you'll probably end up going after going over the bridge is Matoya's Cave, which is actually the music that's playing on this podcast. It's my favorite music in the game. You're going to probably be sick of it because it's going to keep looping. She can't see the future because her crystal ball was stolen. Basically then, the first town that you could really go to is the town of Provoca to the east. You find out that town has been overrun by pirates. So I'd want to say that this is sort of the second boss fight of the game, but it's actually pretty easy. If you're like even a little bit leveled up, you shouldn't have any problem with this fight. But you'll encounter 9 pirates, which could be very intimidating, especially early in the game. But once you fell them, you pretty much restore peace to the town of Provoca, and they actually give you your pirate ship. So obviously, if you're following along, first you started out in Castle Corneria, then a bridge was built, and then you were given a ship. So now the world, in a sense, opens up even more. And you're kind of able to just, sail around and dock at some ports. But again, for the most part, you're kind of on a one-track path to waking up the Elf Prince. You could stop off at the town of Elfland, where the Elf Prince resides, and you find out that the Elf Prince has been put to sleep. And the Elf Prince has been put to sleep by the Dark Elf, Astos. We have some elf interwars going on here. And in order to wake the Elf Prince up, you need Matoya's herb. So now, if you're connecting things here, Matoya can't do anything without her crystal ball. The Elf King can't wake up without Matoya's herb. So, there's just so much going on. So, if you go northwest of Elfland, that's where Astos resides. Well, I kind of spoiled it. So, you'll find somebody there who claims that the crown was stolen by Astos and taken to the Marsh Cave. So the first big, difficulty spike of the game is the Marsh Cave. So your main goal right now is getting the crown and bringing it back to this person in the northwest castle of Elfland. But in order to do so, you have to go through the Marsh Cave. And the Marsh Cave and the areas surrounding it are notorious for being poison areas. And in this game, status effects are awful. I mean, status effects are all pretty bad in almost all the Final Fantasy games, but getting poisoned in this game is one of the most annoying things that could happen. Because if you get poisoned, you get sent down to the bottom. So let's say, if you're looking at the footage right here, Bits, the fighter, is in slot 1. If he gets poisoned after the battle, he will get jettisoned down to spot number 4, and then you have to go into your menu screen by pressing select and kind of rearrange them. And then this is assuming that you have the ability to heal them. Because I believe if you just go to an inn, it doesn't get rid of the poison. You need to have the antidote or the spell in order to cure the poison, which again, early game when money's tight is super duper annoying. Alright, let's get some new footage going on here. Provoke a pirates. Ah, yes, this is probably a good one to bring up. Okay, so obviously at this point you're trying to gear yourself up for the Marsh Cave, whether it be your levels or your inventory or your weapons, your armor, your magic. And let me digress here a little bit about the magic. So the magic in this game works a little bit different than the magic in more modern Final Fantasies. I have not played 2 and 3, so I can't really comment on those right now, but I've played 4, 5, 6, and beyond. And in Final Fantasy IV, it adopts a more traditional magic system where it revolves around magic points. You could use your spells as long as your magic points aren't used up. In this Final Fantasy, magic is divided into 8 different levels. As you level up, you get skill points in those levels. So for example, at an earlier level, you might only be able to use a level 1 spell twice. Which, tell you what, man, in the early game, that's a little bit rough. You'll be doing a lot of resting at the inn and whatnot in order to replenish your spells, especially if you're grinding. Which brings me back to my main point here before the Marsh Cave, which is the biggest difficulty spike. You're going to want to do a lot of grinding. Now, early on, the ogres are probably the best thing to grind because they're not too difficult. They yield really good gold and decent experience, which is great. But the video that I'm playing right now, hopefully it'll get to it because I can't control where it's sliding. The best place to grind is called the Peninsula of Power, and to my knowledge it's in every version of the game. I'm pretty sure it was in the Origins, it's probably in the Game Boy Advance, and it's definitely in the NES version. So there's an area sort of nearby Provoca that's dubbed the Peninsula of Power, where there's certain blocks towards the tip end of the peninsula, if you will, where you'll encounter enemies that are kind of out of your league. So pretty much the strategy revolves around grabbing a tent, heading up there, resting in your tent, obviously saving, and then trying to get through an encounter or two, and then healing up. If you need to go back to town to go to the inn, you do so, and you kind of rinse and repeat. And the reason that you pop a tent before the fights is obviously the fights are very tough. You end up encountering enemies that are just way out of your league, so there's a good possibility that you will die. Certain encounters are a little bit tougher than the others. For example, you have to fight a T-Rex once in a while. It could be pretty tough early in the game. And then there is also a pack of frost wolves, I believe, which could be a huge pain in the rear. But that's why you rest in your tent. If you get wiped out, you simply press reset and go for it again. And that's the quickest way, the most consistent way to level up throughout the entire game. If you need experience points, if you need gold, you go to the Peninsula of Power, straight up. Like, honestly, I did that all the way until the end. The very last grind session I did was the last dungeon of the game. Prior to that, every single grind that I did, either in my playthrough that you see on YouTube or off camera that I discussed on my playthrough on YouTube, was done at the Peninsula of Power. So I typically will grind in the Peninsula of Power. I can't remember the exact level before the Marsh Cave, but let's put it this way. In this playthrough, when I went through the Marsh Cave, I was good. I actually didn't have that much trouble. I had a lot more problems on my Origins playthrough, where I did not know the Peninsula of Power, and I grinded naturally and probably got bored and I wanted to go into the Marsh Cave. But I want to say I went into the Marsh Cave around level 9 or 10, and that should be about good enough to get you through. Ooh, one tip that I'd be can't think of the words, stumbling upon my words there. I don't want to fail to mention is that running is your friend. I didn't really grasp the whole run mentality until about midway through my playthrough. But you don't have to fight everything, man, especially when you have something like the Peninsula of Power to go level up. Some of these battles, they're just not worth your time. Especially if you're in a dungeon, and you know that dungeon's long, and you want to preserve your HP, or your magic, or your limited items at the time, especially early game. Just run. It's really not that big of a deal. So, I don't think I got to the footage that I wanted here, unfortunately, but we press on. So, once you're grinded to a, oh, there I am. I was in the Peninsula of Power. Once you get to a good enough level, it's time to actually head into the Marsh Cave. And pretty much your only goal there is to get the crown. The cave itself is pretty straightforward. It's pretty hard to get lost. You can go in one wrong direction early on. That's kind of pointless. But it's really not that big of a cave. And honestly, if it wasn't for the status effect of poison, this cave really wouldn't be that big of a deal at all. The one thing that I do want to say, though, is that this dungeon, cave, and all the other ones, probably the best strategy, if you're not using the Nintendo Power Guide or the maps that came with the game, if you're kind of doing it blind, save before you go in, take your time. There's lots of stuff to loot throughout these caves and dungeons, and the majority of the time, you're not going to clear it in one shot, especially if it's your first playthrough, and don't feel discouraged by that. Look at it as an incremental thing. Like, let's say you have 2 or 3 goals, I guess, going to the Marsh Cave, and the first one would always be, I would say, loot as far as you can, go back, heal up, save, and then go back in for round 2. And round 2 would either be loot the rest and get the crown, or you could divide it up in 3 where it's loot, save, heal, loot, save, heal, and then just straight shot for the crown. Never, if you feel in your heart of hearts that you are moving too far, too fast, don't push it. You're gonna regret it. Because you can't, I'd fail to remiss in saying this, you cannot save inside of the caves. There are no save spots like there are in like Final Fantasy IV inside of the cave. You have to save outside with a tent, a cabin, a house, or go back to the town and rest at the inn and save. You can't even save on the overworld without consumables. So you really gotta make sure, like let's say you're on the final floor of a dungeon and you're like, I don't know if I'm gonna do this or not. You better make sure that you are before you try. That's all I'm gonna say, otherwise you can be really salty. So eventually, you will get the crown, and then you must bring the crown back to the person that was in the Northwest Castle near Elfland. And I basically spoiled it earlier. Surprise, that person ends up being Astos, the Dark Elf. So then, you fight Astos, reveals his true self basically after getting the crown. You fight Astos and you end up getting Matoya's crystal. So now it's all kind of making sense, right? Go into the Marsh Cave, get the crown, bring the crown to Astos, kill Astos, get the crystal, take the crystal, back to Matoya's cave. Matoya gives you the herb, you take the herb, you go back to the Elf Prince, then all of a sudden, the Elf Prince is magically awoken. And what do you get for your troubles? The Mystic Key. So the Mystic Key, or the Magic Key, whatever you want to call it, there was a bunch of treasure chests, even in, I think, the Marsh Cave, Corneria Castle, and I believe even the Temple of Fiends that had sealed off treasure chests that basically you needed the key in order to open them. So it's probably in your best interest. Yeah, I was going to say Corneria Castle, Elfland Castle, Astos Castle, the Marsh Cave, the Temple of Fiends, and the Dwarf Cave. Okay, some places that we haven't even gone yet. Those are all places that have treasure chests that were locked by the Mystic Key. So it's in your best interest to go back and loot everything that you can. And the most important item, and this game designates important items when you get it. It plays a different jingle than, like, let's say you picked up gold, is the TNT. And now your next goal is to bring that TNT to the Dwarf Cave, which you haven't gone yet, most likely, to a man named Narek, a dwarf, not a man, named Narek. And that TNT will be used to create a canal, which will then allow you to sail through, and it opens up even more of the map. There you go. For those of you watching on YouTube, you get a little glimpse of Astos before we move along here. Key looting. No, we'll move on here. So, at this point, you did the Temple of Fiends, you did everything revolving around Astos and the Elf Prince, and you now opened up the world, with your main goal now being the first Elemental Fiend, which resides in the Earth Cave. And the Earth Cave is actually set up pretty interestingly, I find. After blowing up that new tunnel with the TNT, you go to the town of Melmond, and there you learn a couple things. I advise you to talk to everybody. Obviously, you get story and plot points. You learn that a vampire attacked the town and basically was just wreaking havoc on everything. And you also learn about the rot, which is affecting that particular part of the land, which I'm sure if you don't address will probably spread throughout the entirety of the world in which everybody lives. The vampire resides in the Earth Cave. So I like this part of the game, actually. This part's pretty cool. So you can't finish the Earth Cave in one shot. It's impossible. So what you do is you go through, we're in the Dwarf Cave there. Let me see if I can get up the Earth Cave stuff. Vampire Ruby, open this pit up. There we go. Hopefully I didn't repeat the same footage. Again, first podcast, people, we're gonna learn as we go. So your first trip to the Earth Cave, the main goal is to get to the vampire, defeat him, and take the ruby. The ruby is what you're looking for. Not so much the vampire just happens to be in your way. The ruby allows you to get something that's very important in order for you to actually finish the Earth Cave. You go to Titan's Tunnel after receiving the ruby, and you give the ruby to the Titan in order to pass. Basically, you can go to Titan's Tunnel before you go into the Earth Cave, but the Titan will be in your way. There's absolutely no way to pass through. You can't fight him, you can't kill him, you have to give him the ruby. So you must go in the Earth Cave, beat the vampire, retrieve the ruby, and give it to the Titan. When the Titan moves out of the way, it then opens up the pathway to get to Sardis Cave, who gives you his rod. Pause. And basically what the rod does is after you beat the vampire, there's something kind of blocking a stairway. And the ruby obviously doesn't do it, and you don't have anything else. You know, you just use the TNT, so what can I use? It's the rod. The rod ultimately will reveal the stairway, which will allow you to complete the Earth Cave. So that's why I said you can't beat it in one shot. It's pretty much a two-step process, and it could be 3 too, especially if you're not properly leveled. And obviously if you run into a little bit of bad luck, which can happen from time to time in these games. So once you have Sardis' rod in hand, you can return to the 3rd level of the Earth Cave, and you use the rod to basically open up the stairs. You go down and fight through a few more floors, there's some more stuff to loot, and then you encounter your first Earth Fiend, which is the Lich. Which I actually am going to fast forward to this part. So the Lich is the first Earth Fiend, the first like major boss of the game. This is the first boss that could legitimately wipe you out. One of the things that makes the Lich very tough is the Lich starts the fight with an attack that attacks all of your party members and hits quite hard, if I do say so myself. I think in my playthrough, the Lich might have killed one person and put 2 other people in critical spot, or the Lich put 3 people in a critical spot. The only one that wasn't like close to dying right away was Bits, thankfully, my fighter. It's a tough fight. But, you know, as long as you're smart about it, heal when you can, use certain status affecting things when you can. Like, it's always advisable to cast fast if you have it on your best attackers. Use your most powerful magic spells, obviously. If you know that somebody's weak to a magic spell, you should save the higher level spells for those fights coming up. You don't want to burn them early on into the cave. But it's going to be a tough fight. It's not going to be easy against the Lich, but once you do defeat the Lich, that's the first fiend down. Sorry for all the burping. Obviously, you saw me drinking soda. You're able to restore light to your first orb, which means you only have 3 more to go. And from there, I find that the game, it starts moving a lot quicker. Once you get past the Earth Cave, I feel like it's a lot more bang bang. Obviously, there's lots of grinding and going back to certain towns and stuff to get weapons and spells, but you're on a very straight track at this point. So after you get that, the next place that you're supposed to go is the Gurgu Volcano. Let's get up the correct footage here. Alright. And the second elemental fiend, I don't know how to pronounce this, Kari, resides in the Gurgu Volcano. But before you go to the volcano, you go to Crescent Lake, which is a pretty big town. There you see the sages. They're over in the northeast side of town. It can be kind of hard to find them. I refer to them as the circling sages. They all have great wisdom and things to tell you. I guess they're referred to as the 12 wise men, but I always refer to them as the circling sages. Either way, one of them actually gives you a canoe. Without the canoe, you're actually unable to go to the Gurgu Volcano. So basically, you could sail, but then there's certain water tiles that they look different, and those are the ones that you ride in your canoe. You could take a twisty-turny sort of path to get there. It can be a little bit confusing, to be honest with you, and some of the fights there are a little annoying. Things that could status affect you, what have you. But eventually you find your way to the Gurgu Volcano, and as you could assume, if it's a volcano, pretty much everything is fire here, so ice is going to be your best friend. There's lots of good loot in here. Probably the best thing that you'll find in the Gurgu Volcano is the ice sword, which will most likely go to your fighter, or in my case it was Bits. And the final floor of the volcano is laid out very strange. Again, if you don't have a map and stuff, you could probably get lost pretty easily. But really there's only 2 things to do there. One is you can get a good armor set, which is the flame armor, and then ultimately you can kill the Fiend of Fire. I'm going to refer to it as the Kari. I'm going to go Kari. The Kari I found was actually easier than the Lich, because the Lich had that really cruddy attack where it almost wipes your party out to begin the fight. For the Kari, obviously if you have the ice sword, you have an upper hand. If you have a good ice spell, you have an upper hand. Just make sure you're constantly doing the things that you need to do. Keeping people out of, danger mode with their HP, casting fast on your best fighters, saving, again, your best magic spells, in this case would be ice, and just pretty much going to town. And it really won't be that tough of a fight, to be completely honest with you. Let's see where this footage leaves me off. Are we right by the Kari fight? No, we're not. We're at the beginning of the cave, unfortunately. But either way, once you defeat the Kari, you'll then restore light to your second orb. So as you can see, it's like right after the Earth Cave, you're pretty much on a straight path to get to your second one. But oh boy, the next stop. Okay, so this is one that I want to talk about a little bit. So the next stop is going to be the Ice Cave. So far you've had Earth, you've had Fire. It's only natural that you would have an ice element at some point. So, oh, the Ice Cave. I remember this screwing me over on my Origins playthrough. It screwed me over on my NES playthrough. And I'm sure part of the reason why I stopped on the Game Boy Advance playthrough is it screwed me over there as well. To me, Ice Cave is one of the... other than the last dungeon of the game, the Ice Cave is probably the hardest place in the entire game. There are some truly shitty enemies in the Ice Cave, I tell you. There's also some troll things set up, which I fell victim to multiple times without even really realizing it. A very, very strong enemy type with a spell called Rub, which could insta-kill you in your party if it lands. Guards a useless item in the Ice Cave, and you know, I want to loot everything, right? I think it's the cloth, which is fairly useless, and you actually get it earlier in the game. I fell victim to that twice in a row on my playthrough before realizing, oh, I don't even need that. But then as I was traversing through more, I think I got screwed by them again with the rub attack. I think it took me 5 times to get to the Ice Cave. I think my party pretty much got wiped out 4 times, because there was another time where I encountered, might have been Wizard or something. I was unable to run from the fight, and it just started wiping people out, so I just insta-reset. It was freaking garbage, man. But the main gimmick of the Ice Cave, besides trolling and randomly having crazy enemies, is in order to get what you need to get to where you are, which is ultimately you need the floater, which is a thing that pretty much lets you fly in the sky. You get an airship essentially from that. That's not the airship itself, but getting that allows you to get the airship. In order to do that, you do sort of puzzles. You fall through holes in the floor in a certain pattern on a certain level in order to get to it. You're actually able to get to the treasure room pretty early in the Ice Cave. The only issue is that obviously you don't have access to it, and you have to do the aforementioned hole puzzle, which I just mentioned. Beyond that, you can loot some decent stuff such as the ice armor. But like I said, this Ice Cave, man, it is... be prepared for some rage. That's probably my favorite part of my playthrough that I uploaded on YouTube, is the Ice Cave rave. And the best part about the Ice Cave rage is that the really heavy rage didn't even make it. I cut it out because it was so... I was so mad. I didn't want to leave everything in there. But yeah, pretty much your goal there is you want to get to... obviously you want to pick up the ice armor if you can, but you want to get the floater. There is no Elemental Fiend in here, but there is a boss, sort of, called the Eye, which I didn't find to be particularly overwhelming. Obviously it was a lot easier than the Elemental Fiends in my opinion, and there's other enemies in the Ice Cave that were stronger than what was guarding it. But thankfully, I mean, I'm not complaining, trust me. If it was as bad as the other thing was, I'd probably be hanging from the bathroom at that point. But once you're able to retrieve the floater, let's see where we are here with the footage. Ice Cave, raid, airship, baby, there we go. The floater allows you to, there's a desert area south of Crescent Lake, which seemed kind of, you know, out of place once you're looking around, but obviously it was put there for a reason. In the middle of the desert, you end up learning this in the town. You use the floater, and the airship will then come out, and this allows you to fly across the world. And the best part about flying, guys, no random encounters. So if you get lost when you're flying around in the overworld, it's really not that big of a deal. The only cruddy thing is you can only land it in the grassland squares, so you can't land it in a lot of spots, and there's going to be areas coming up, particularly like right after this, that you have to land pretty far away and you have to move around on your feet and such, which can be kind of annoying. And I'm realizing here, guys, the footage that I'm playing, I would really have to go through and like edit everything to condense it perfectly to a podcast, and I don't know if I have that kind of time on my hands. I wanted to show you guys me unearthing the airship, but I don't think we're going to be able to get to it because I want to move on to the next part already. I did want to make this around an hour if possible, and we're already at almost like 50 minutes. Let's see. There we go. I could definitely skip some of that. So, after you unearth the airship, your next step should probably be the Temple of Ordeal, Castle of Ordeal. Basically, you land on these sets of islands that are inhabited by dragons, and eventually you find Bahamut. And Bahamut wants you to test your courage, bring a proof of your courage. So, naturally, you go to the Castle of Ordeal, Temple of Ordeal. It's like known as different things. Hold on. The localizations are all friggin' all over the place. I think in the NES version it's known as the Castle of Ordeal, right? Let's see. Arda, Crescent Lake, Urgu. Oh, it doesn't even tell me. You fuck. Let's see. Just want to make sure that I'm not yes. So it's, I think it's really known as the Temple of Ordeal, but in the NES version it's known as Castle of Ordeal. So pretty much what Castle of Ordeal is it's sort of like a mini maze. There's some things to loot throughout, some tough fights here and there, but ultimately you need to find a rat tail, and you give the tail to Bahamut, and that's your test of courage. And pretty much your reward for that is you receive class promotions, which I talked about earlier. The fighter turns into a warrior, the thief turns into a ninja, the white mage turns into a white wizard, black mage turns into a black wizard, the monk turns into a black belt. I'm trying to remember the classes that I didn't use on my recent playthrough. The black belt, I think, turns into a monk, and the red mage would turn into would it be a red baron or something along those lines? Let me see. Oh no, red wizard. That would make sense. White wizard, black wizard, red wizard. Anyway. So, it's a pretty important area, and I'm pretty sure, from what I understand, that you can actually skip that. But if you can't, somebody tell me in the comments, because I'd be curious to know. But I feel like it's skippable, because I don't think you need any of those items in order to truly progress. But it's very... definitely do it, that's all I'm going to say. The castle itself could be kind of annoying since it's built in a sort of like a maze-like structure, but it's totally worth it at the end of the day. You know, especially if you have someone like the thief who desperately needs a class promotion. Pretty much the most pivotal part of the game as far as like a big spike in your abilities and your ability to learn new spells and equip new things, whether it be weapons or armor. But as you can expect, you gotta get back on course for your elements, because you only have 2 of the orbs restored at this point. I found in my playthrough, after the Castle of Ordeals, I did a lot of like grinding and gearing up and stuff. And then you have to go to the Sea Shrine, which I remember being really hard on my Origins playthrough, but it really wasn't that bad on the NES version. Couple things you have to do here. So, it's very similar to earlier in the game when you had to do all those steps to awaken the Elf Prince. But in order to get down to the Sea Shrine, you need stuff, basically. So, first thing you need is you need a bottle. There was talk of a caravan in the desert on the northwest continent. So you gotta like park somewhere, walk a little bit, and you buy this bottle, okay? And then you go to the town of Gaia, and there is an area where you're able to use the bottle to unleash a fairy. And then this fairy gives you stuff called Oxyale. In order to get into the Sea Shrine, ultimately, the Oxyale is what you need. And if I remember correctly, I think the bottle was really expensive. Let me see. Can we get... Where the bottle at? Bottle. Yeah, the bottle was 50,000 gold, so I remember having to grind a lot for that, because that's a lot of cash, especially if you've been going around to the towns and properly upgrading your equipment and your magic. I was like dead broke. I remember I probably had to grind for about like 40 minutes real time to get that money. And then I wanted to grind a little bit beyond that too, because I didn't want to be completely broke. But once you get the bottle, get the fairy, get the Oxyale, and then you go to the town of Onrak, on the lower east side of town. You're finally able to enter the Sea Shrine. You utilize this weird, like, I don't know, sort of like dive thing. Here, let me like actually speed up the footage here even more. Oh no, it reset. Son of a bitch. Well, again, guys, first podcast, it is what it is. You have to bear with me. Try my best here. Well, anyway, so the Sea Shrine, the Elemental Fiend that you fight in there is the Kraken. As you could expect, if everything is a water element, if you have any general knowledge, especially of Pokemon, what would be good? Lightning. So you're going to want to make sure that you save all your lightning spells for the tough enemy encounters as well as the Kraken. In saying that, the Sea Shrine is another two-step kind of process. So if you go to the top of this Sea Shrine, you're able to find all these mermaids, and then you talk to them, and you know, they give you some pretty decent information and banter here and there. In one of the rooms it's actually a weird room, by the way. In order to get to that room, you have to go what looks like it's a dead end, but then the screen ends up wrapping around, and then you're able to go in and you grab the slab. The slab is something that you need later, but obviously, like, you can't use it right away, but you do need it later, so you have to get that now. And then I would recommend leaving, saving, healing, and then coming back in to go down, the opposite way basically, to fight the Kraken, who's the Fiend of the Water. I found that the Kraken fight wasn't too bad either. Again, for the most part, you can kind of rinse and repeat most of the strategies, just kind of buff up your best attackers, save your best elemental spells and such, and just go to town and just make sure that you're healing before you die. I mean, it's not really rocket science, you know. As long as you're at a good level, the game's not going to be too hard if you have a pretty decent normalized game plan going into every single fight. Once you fell the Kraken, there's only one more elemental orb basically ready to be restored, which is in a combination of towers and floating castles. Before that, you actually need to go to the waterfall, if I remember correctly, yeah. So we'll get into that. I think I'll keep everything at 200% speed now, try my best to have stuff on the screen that's relevant for you guys. So, the slab that you got in the Sea Shrine, you fly it to Melmond and you give it to Dr. Une. He will then teach you the language of Leafinish. If you flew around a lot, it was possible to go to the town of Leafin, where you can't communicate with anybody, basically. You needed the slab in order for Dr. Une to basically translate everything and teach you the language. But now, since you know that, and you've given the slab to him, and you know the language and all that kind of stuff, you could go to that town, and one of the citizens will now give you a chime, which allows you to enter the Mirage Tower, which is pretty much, I guess I would say the very beginning of the end game. So obviously, you know, stuff that you have to do. But before that, before you go into the Mirage Tower, you have to go into the waterfall, which is, if I remember correctly, it was at the end of, it's a pretty straight path. And in there, you heard in another town, I can't remember the town right now exactly, but you heard about a robot in a cube. And the robot and cube that you're looking for is in the waterfall. And this allows you to enter the floating castle. So basically, the chime will allow you to get to the beginning of the endgame area, but then if you progress to the end of that, you'll be unable to get into the floating castle, which is the second part of that, without the cube. So you need the cube. You could totally, get the chime and then think that you're on your way, and then, fuck, I can't go any further, what do I do? So, my advice, get the cube, unless you feel like just kind of going through and doing the Mirage Tower twice for some reason. But either way, the Mirage Tower is located in the center of the Great Desert. Luckily, there's like a pretty small pixely area that you're going to be able to land on, which doesn't create too much of a walk back and forth. There it is. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see where I parked. And then the castle's pretty much a little bit to the northwest. Or excuse me, the Mirage Tower. Jeez. The tower itself can be pretty annoying. It's pretty easy to get, I wouldn't say lost, but get misdirected. And there are some pretty tough fights in there. And I find that the encounter rate, I don't know if it's just purely coincidence, it seems to be pretty high when you're in there. It can be a bit of a pain. And pretty much you could traverse your way through there. There's lots of stuff to loot, although I will say when you're getting towards this point of the game, looting is a little less important. Little less important, because at this point you probably have most of the stuff that you really need. There's only a few things that I will actually go out of my way to loot at this point. Because I'll probably even have enough money that I don't even really need to loot anything. But once you reach the end of the Mirage Tower, there's a sort of boss fight in a room, which isn't that big of a deal. And now, since you have the cube, you're able to go up to the floating castle, which is basically the second half of this area. And the floating castle is what actually contains the final Elemental Fiend, Tiamat, who is the Fiend of Air. So, when you're in the floating castle, the most important thing to loot is the adamant. The adamant is, earlier when you were in the dwarf cave, I want to say, there was a blacksmith there that basically said, bring adamant back to me and I'll fucking make some sick shit for you. So now you finally have it, and you're able to get the Excalibur sword because of that. So it's a pretty important thing to loot, and if I remember correctly, that's pretty much it. I think it's not even that far out of the way, which is really good. One of the main tricky parts about the floating castle, though, is one of the last floors and then the path to Tiamat are really annoying. There's kind of a puzzle. It's one of those you have to go in the right direction. If you go in the wrong direction, things just sort of kind of keep repeating itself. But if you're able to figure out the puzzle on the 4th floor and go in the final direction, then you are on a straight path to Tiamat. The only issue there is, my god, the encounter rate on the path to Tiamat was nuts, and you also have a small chance to encounter a war mech, I believe, which is one of the strongest random battles in the game, and I was lucky enough to encounter it, and it almost fucking killed me. For some reason I was trying to be tough and fight it, and that was a big mistake on my part. Either way, eventually you will get to Tiamat, dispose of him, and at that point you'll have all 4 orbs restored, and then you step on the teleporter and you leave the castle, and at this point you are literally at the end game. And where do you go? Well, you learn about all these things such as time loops and blah 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 blah. So if you think about it, oh yeah, I gotta go back to the Temple of Fiends. But before you do that, make sure you stop back off at the Dwarf Cave and drop off your adamant and pick up your Excalibur. And I equipped that to bits. And there's going to be another weapon that you find in the Temple of Fiends, which was part of a multi-tiered run through it, which I gave to Ryu, my ninja. But you could pretty much give it to almost anybody, I think, because I think, like I said earlier, even the Nintendo Power Guide said you can give it to the White Mage, or White Wizard. I don't know. I didn't do that though, I gave it to Ryu. So, when you go back to the Temple of Fiends, now that you have all of your orbs replenished from killing the Elemental Fiends, you will travel 2,000 years into the past. And this is the final dungeon of the game. It could be very tough. There are a bunch of cruddy enemies on the first few floors, and then the floors start kind of turning into regurgitated versions of the dungeons that you went through with the Elemental Fiends. So, on your path to the end, final boss, who's Chaos, memed into eternity at this point, you do have to refight the Fiends. They're a little different. I can't remember. One of them is like really different. But in saying that, if you're properly leveled and properly equipped, none of the fights really matter too much. But I did have to go through 3 times before I beat it. Once was just kind of going through and fighting a little bit and then retreating because I just felt like I wasn't going to make it. Next was to get the most powerful weapon in the game, even more powerful than the Excalibur, which is the Masamune. And then I retreated and saved, and then I went through. So you're probably, unless you're like severely over-leveled and you're able to get a lot of good running away from random encounters and such, you're probably going to end up going through there a couple times, at the very least, if not just to get the Masamune and then equipping, healing, saving, and going back in to finally get through it. But I wouldn't say it's really not hard to get through. It's pretty straightforward to get through this area. Like I said, you have to refight all the Elemental Fiends. And then you're about to fight Garland at the very end, which, by the way, I just realized I haven't been updating my footage, and I do sincerely apologize. Let's get that up on the screen. And Garland will reveal his true form, which is Chaos. And Chaos is one of the coolest sprite works in the entire game by far. The fight itself actually wasn't too bad. I found that I was actually able to get through that in one shot, I believe. I don't think I ended up getting killed. I don't think any of my party members got killed. But the one thing about Chaos that can be pretty tricky is Chaos knows lots of spells. Chaos knows... I want to get the entire list up here if I can. Ice 3, Lightning 3, Slow 2, Paralyze, and Crack. Again, the thing that I'm reading might be a different localization, since there are so many of them, but yeah, Chaos isn't anything to mess with. You gotta make sure that you are properly equipped and properly leveled for that, and you don't want to go into the Chaos fight, like, without full health, and without, like, your best magic spells ready to rock. Well, I think it might have been after I got the Masamune, or the first trip, I was basically to Chaos, or right to Tiamat, and I just simply ran out of, like, I didn't have, like, any consumables, and my magic spells were so low that I felt like, you know, I'm not ready to take this on right now, so I'm not gonna bother. But, like I said, guys, you know, it's an RPG. As long as you're properly equipped and you got, you know, you managed your spells and your consumables properly, you should be able to get through with little resistance. For the most part, I would say the toughest spots of the game, by far, are the Ice Cave, the Mirage Tower, Floating Castle, and the Temple of Fiends. And I would say, realistically, just based off of how and when you encounter them, the Ice Cave might be the toughest place in the entire game, especially if you fall victim to really cruddy random encounters, and if you're, you know, somebody that likes to loot. But yeah, pretty much at that point, guys, once you beat Chaos, you know, at that point you've gone back in time, you've restored. I actually want to get the official thing here, so I'm not completely bullshitting. Let's see. So yeah, as you've learned, the time loop will just consistently keep happening. So even though you were able to go back in time to defeat Chaos, when the 2,000 year cycle happens again, basically the same thing is going to have to happen again, which can sort of be passed off as, I guess, replay value almost, because you can kind of be like, oh, the cycle's happening again if you want to play through it once more. But yeah, I mean, like, overall, guys, what are my main gripes with this? I didn't really discuss that as I was going through the kind of step-by-step for the game here. There's some limitations for sure on this game. One of the main ones is, they corrected this even in the remakes of these. If you are scheduled to attack an enemy and that enemy dies, the person that was scheduled to attack will then attack the air, which could be kind of annoying. It's something you really have to work into your strategy. Another thing is a lot of spells actually don't work. Final Fantasy NES spell bugs. There's lots of bugs. So, Temper doesn't work at all. Saber doesn't work at all. Expire does not work unless the target is the party. Lock always misses. Lock 2, instead of decreasing enemy evade by 20%, it increases evade by 20%. And Heal 2 works at a battle as designed, but in battle works as Heal 3. So actually that's one of the few bugs that actually works in your favor. So remember that, guys. Heal 2 in battle serves as Heal 3. So that's pretty cool, actually. But yeah, it makes a lot of spells useless. Even a few reusable weapons and items won't work properly because of those bugs. And that's another thing that I wanted to mention. Later in the game, you get, well, actually throughout the entire game, but later in the game you get better ones. There's lots of items, kind of like enchanted armor and weapons that you could use consistently over and over again. A lot of them will cast pretty good magic spells and level 2 magic spells, like the Thor hammer casts lightning 2, I believe. The Zeus gauntlet casts something pretty good, which also might be a bug because I think it was supposed to do something to your party, but it ends up attacking the enemies. But there's lots of good things to use, which also helps later in the game when you don't want to rip through your magic spells in the tougher dungeons. I found that I was using a lot of those reusable items, so to speak, with my black wizard and my white wizard. But yeah, beyond that, probably another thing that bothers me a lot about this game is you are unable to, like, if you want to buy 99 heals, oh, it's gonna take some time. What I would do, and it's funny because I actually recommended it in the Nintendo Power Strategy Guide, was I played on my Retro AVS, so I had the ability to use Turbo. So I would set Turbo and just kind of sit there and hold the button, take a nap, watch a YouTube video for 5 minutes before I could heal up, because this is one of those games, man, that it's pretty much, you should have 99 heals on you at all times if you can. Because trust me, you will go through them quick, and you do not have enough healing spells to really get you through it, unless you're just completely over leveled and have godlike RNG with running away and battling, all that type of stuff. But flaws aside, Final Fantasy is a classic. I really don't think you can go wrong with no matter what version you play of this game. I hope to try the Pixel Remastered soon. Do I recommend that you play the NES version? 100%. Some people, like with other franchises such as like Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest, they'll be like, oh, why would you play the NES versions? Just play the remakes or this, that, and the other. You know what? You gotta experience the originals. If you're a fan of these games, if you're a fan of these series, you owe it to yourself to play the original. You do. But just like graphics alone, let alone some of the things that got tweaked and changed, it's worthwhile of other playthroughs. Like, I'm actually legitimately thinking about playing through the Pixel Remaster basically ASAP at this point, even though I just finished the NES version, just because I want to experience it again. I want to see the differences, see what it has to offer. And if you're somebody that hasn't played this game before, hopefully I convince you to do so. And if not, maybe try to find somebody else to convince you to do so, because I really do think you should play it. And if you have played it before, revisit it. Revisit it and then compare it to one of the remakes and see how you feel. I think that's one of the coolest things about this, is because it's on so many different platforms, you have so many different ways to compare the game. And you have so many different ways to enjoy it. You might enjoy one more than the other, you might enjoy all of them equally, but you won't know until you try. So with that being said, kind of want to wrap things up here. Like I said, I'll link the Final Fantasy Origins review in the description below. It's close enough to it where you kind of get the picture. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the podcast. It's not perfect. I don't have all the time in the world, guys, to make things perfect. If I had it my way, I would have had more time to edit some ridiculous video that could have played and had a complete script and everything was synced up perfectly, but it's never going to be like that. This is basically one step away from being live. At the end of the day, I just hope that you enjoyed going through this journey with me through this game, enjoyed my thoughts on this game, my experience, my history with it, and above all else, if you don't enjoy my podcast, just try to enjoy Final Fantasy for what it is. A true RPG classic. It's on any given day, you could rank this as #1 in my opinion of the 8-bit era. Even, you know, with Dragon Warrior 2, 3, and 4, Phantasy Star, all these games are great franchises. You can't go wrong. But if I had to pick one, that is really tough. I probably would go with Final Fantasy, honestly. As much as I love Dragon Warrior, I beat Dragon Warrior a couple times, and Phantasy Star blew me away. Phantasy Star, in typical Master System fashion, was one of the most technically advanced, vibrant, popping, if you will, games that I've ever played, especially the 8-bit era. But at the end of the day, I think I just like the way the Final Fantasy formula a little bit more than the other two. But anyways, I'll leave that up to you. I went well over an hour here. Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. I don't know what episode 2 is going to be. I don't know if it's just going to be me flying solo again. But we'll figure that out as we get there. It'll probably end up being a game that's not as long. I took a shot in the dark here starting with an RPG. That's all I'm going to say. Because there's so much to cover. It's a little bit overwhelming, and I kind of did this essentially unscripted, so hopefully it wasn't too bad. If it was that much of a drag, I really do apologize. And you know what? Maybe I'll can the podcast. If you guys enjoy it, I'll keep going. But I wanted to give it a shot. If you guys enjoyed it, please leave a like, comment. I do my best to reply to all comments in all my videos. And subscribe if you haven't already. For those of you not in the know about my channel, I do retro video game reviews, playthroughs, challenge runs, podcasts, pickup videos, collection videos, anything and everything you could think of in the realm of classic gaming I will do on here. And hopefully you enjoy my content. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. And I'll see you guys in the next podcast. Or the next video, whatever it ends up being first. Take it easy.